Welcome to the Explainer. Let's jump right in, because today we're looking at a genuinely profound piece of classical text, Surah Al-Anbiya, specifically verses 48 through 92. But listen, we aren't just going to look at this as some piece of ancient history. Actually, when you strip it down, this text is a masterclass in human psychology. It's literally a survival guide. We're going to analyze it as a highly practical blueprint for how we as human beings can face extreme hardship, find real resilience in our darkest moments, and somehow pull through to the other side. So if you've ever felt completely overwhelmed by adversity, the basic understanding and practical guidelines we're unpacking today are absolutely for you. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover the Meccan context. 2, the unity of the prophets. 3, Abraham, challenging the status quo. 4, Job and Jonah, overcoming adversity. And finally, the ultimate universal reminder. We're going to break down all this complex theology into highly manageable, practical guidelines you can actually use. Section 1, the Meccan context. To truly grasp the raw power of this text, we have to understand the intense crucible in which it was first revealed. Context is absolutely everything here. This revelation arrived during a deeply, deeply traumatic period for the early Muslims in Mecca. We're talking about the late Meccan period, specifically right between the 10th and 13th year of the Prophet Muhammad's mission. This came right on the heels of what is historically known as the Year of Sorrow, just a time of immense, crushing personal loss and grief. The early Muslim community was facing severe social ostracism, intense theological disputes, and physical persecution from the Quraysh tribe. They were literally on the eve of having to abandon their homes entirely. So these verses, they weren't just abstract philosophy. They were a deeply necessary, urgent source of spiritual fortitude meant to keep an entire community from completely collapsing under pressure. Now, what's really fascinating is how the text actually addresses all this chaos. It introduces terms like furqan, which basically means a criterion or a moral compass, and zikr, meaning a reminder. The text draws this direct parallel between the ancient Torah given to Moses and the Quran, describing both of them as a furqan. It's essentially telling these beleaguered early Muslims, look, here is your standard. Here is your light to dispel the darkness of ignorance. Because think about it, when the world around you is just completely chaotic, you need a fixed, unchanging moral compass to navigate it. And that is exactly what this text provided. Section 2, Unity of the Prophets. Shifting gears from the immediate day-to-day struggles of the Meccan believers, we find the core theological message that binds all these ancient stories together. And that core message is Tawheed, the oneness of God. The text doesn't just list off prophets randomly like a history book. Not at all. It presents all these historical figures as part of a single, unified spiritual brotherhood. It doesn't matter where or when they lived, from ancient Mesopotamia to Egypt to the Levant, they were all delivering the exact same essential message of Tawheed. They were all calling their people to worship God alone and, crucially, to uphold justice. To really drive this point home, the text does something structurally amazing. In the span of just 45 verses, it mentions a rapid succession of 14 distinct historical figures. 14! Moses, Aaron, Abraham, Lot, Noah, David, Solomon, Job. The list goes on. This rapid-fire style, it's totally intentional. It's a logical argument aimed directly at the Quraysh, demonstrating this unbroken continuity of prophetic tradition. It proves that the struggles of the present are deeply, deeply connected to the legacy of the past. And each figure in this prophetic roster isn't just a historical footnote. They serve as a very specific case study for human vulnerability and virtue. You've got Moses and Aaron representing divine guidance. Abraham is the ultimate archetype of courage against flawed traditions. Noah is pure perseverance when literally the whole world is against you. Job is patience in physical affliction. And Jonah is sincere repentance when you've just messed up. By giving us this diverse lineup, the text is essentially handing us a blueprint for surviving almost any flavor of human suffering. All of this builds up and culminates beautifully in verse 92, which reads, "Indeed, this, your community, is one community, and I am your Lord, so worship me." This is the grand finale, the ultimate summary of the unified prophetic mission. It's a massive call to a universal spiritual brotherhood. It's telling the reader, hey, by adhering to this guidance, you aren't alone. You are part of an ancient, enduring community of resilience and faith. Section 3, Abraham, challenging the status quo.
Abraham's narrative is particularly fascinating here because it offers a highly practical guideline for exactly how to intellectually challenge flawed societal norms. And this brilliantly illustrates the psychological parallel the text is drawing. On one side, we have Abraham's ancient logical dismantling of idols, where he leaves the biggest idol intact just to expose the absolute absurdity of his society's beliefs. On the other side, we have the Prophet Muhammad's contemporary challenge to Meccan polytheism. By highlighting Abraham's intellectual demonstration and the trial by fire that followed, the text is holding up a mirror for the early Muslims' own immediate struggles. It's telling them straight up, challenging the status quo has always been dangerous, but it is a path tread by the absolute greatest of leaders.
When Abraham is actually thrown into the fire for his defiance, we get this incredibly striking imagery. O fire, be coolness and safety upon Abraham. Now, obviously, this is a profound theological statement of divine sovereignty, right? God commanding the very forces of nature to protect the righteous. But on a psychological level, I really want you to consider how this applies today. Because when you are thrown into your own metaphorical fires, social rejection, massive career crises, intense pressure, this verse invites you to seek that exact same coolness and safety through an unwavering trust in a higher power.
Section 4. Job and Jonah. Overcoming adversity. Let's look at two figures whose stories are specifically tailored to the absolute lowest points of the human experience. This raises the direct, heavy question we all face eventually. How do we handle impossible hardships when all seems completely lost? Seriously, when your health fails, when we make terrible mistakes, or when we are just trapped in the dark. The source text bridges these ancient figures right into our modern human experience to answer this exact question. It gives us practical, step-by-step guidelines for surviving extreme distress. First up, we look at Job, or Ayyub, afflicted with disease and just unimaginable loss. But his response? It is not to scream at the heavens in grievance. Instead, he offers this famous supplication. Indeed, adversity has touched me, and you are the most merciful of the merciful. This is the ultimate archetype of Sabr, patience. Notice the phrasing here. It's a model of fortitude, humility, and contentment. He states his reality plainly, adversity has touched me, but then he immediately affirms God's mercy. It is a powerful, profound, psychological pivot from victimhood to faithful endurance. Then we have Jonah, referred to as Dul Nun. Jonah's story hits close to home for a lot of us, because his hardship comes entirely from his own actions. He left his people in anger and frustration, only to find himself swallowed by a whale, plunged into absolute darkness. But here's the amazing part. In that terrifying vulnerability, he manages to transform his anger and despair into the ultimate model of sincere repentance. Notice how this builds into a highly practical, three-step formula for seeking deliverance. In the belly of the whale, Jonah's prayer is incredibly structured. Step 1 is Tawheed, affirming the oneness of God. There is no deity except you. Step 2 is Tasbih, exalting God. Exalted are you, meaning you are above any flaw. And then step 3, honestly the hardest part, Itraf, the confession of personal wrongdoing. Indeed, I have been of the wrongdoers. He owns his mistake completely. This three-step process, it's a timeless, incredibly practical tool for anyone who needs to find their way back to the light after making a wrong turn.
Section 5, the ultimate universal reminder. When you start summarizing the repeating pattern that binds all these trials together, if you read through this passage in Arabic, you'll notice a rhythmic anchor phrase that repeats over and over. فَأَسْتَجَبْنَا lahu, so we responded to him. This phrase appears right after the trials of Noah, Job, Jonah, and Zechariah. It is literally the core thesis of the text, proving that divine mercy is not distant. It's not aloof. It is always, always responsive to sincere human vulnerability and genuine supplication. So the crucial point is this. The text goes out of its way to show that even prophets are vulnerable humans who face extreme, sometimes agonizing trials. It teaches us that sincere supplication, reaching out with real humility, is a highly effective, powerful tool for deliverance. It assures us that divine mercy ultimately vindicates those who stay righteous. And finally, by studying this, the text continues to act as a furqan, a moral compass, providing us with a basic understanding and practical guidelines for navigating our everyday modern lives. I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. We've seen today that the greatest historical figures in this tradition were absolutely not immune to pain. They faced moments of profound vulnerability, physical distress, and even self-inflicted mistakes. But they used a specific spiritual and psychological blueprint to survive and triumph. So the question is, knowing these ancient lessons of patience, repentance, and courage, how will you use this blueprint to face your next trial? Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and I genuinely hope this gives you the tools you need the next time you have to face the fire.